So here we have Experian's Q1 2023 automotive finance market report. They've been putting this out for many, many years. It's great information. And you'll see across the top, those are the current Q1 numbers there. And then we've overlaid the Q4 2019 numbers in the boxes at the bottom. So we can get a nice comparison of what the world looked like before the pandemic and what the world looks like now. And I'm going to focus in, of course, on the deep subprime and subprime tiers, because those are the two that we work in, and those are the folks that are the most dramatically impacted by this scenario. And you can see that for deep subprime customers, their average amount financed on their retail installment sales contract for last quarter was $19,000, a little over. And for a subprime customer, it was a little over $22,000. We go back and we look at the comparison from 2019 below, deep subprime averaged just over $16,000. So it's increased by $3,000 in 4 years. And subprime customer used to be at $17,700, so they have increased by $4,500 over the last 4 years. And that is impactful. And the way that we can tell is we jump over to the right side of this slide, and you'll see the deep subprime average monthly payment at $508 a month. And for a subprime customer at $527 a month. That's huge. That is a very expensive payment for someone who may not have the strongest income. If you go back and you look at how that compares to 2019, you'll basically see that it's increased $100 or more for both of those tiers per month. And that is, that's significant for a subprime or deep subprime customer. Now, the reason for that, of course, is the traditional way to finance a vehicle is on a retail installment sales contract, which is that standard simple interest note that you fill out the contract when you buy a car and you finance it with a lender. And really what we run into is basically a math problem at that point. There are really only 4 levers that you have in a retail installment sales contract to get to a payment. The first one is the sales price, right? And we just looked at the fact that cars cost more than they ever have. And you can't ask a dealership to sell the car for less than what they paid for it. Otherwise, that dealership is not going to be in business for very long. The second lever, of course, is down payment, right? If you walk in with a check for $10,000, you can quickly bring down your amount financed to a much more reasonable monthly payment. However, unfortunately, for the deep subprime and subprime contingent, most of these folks are living, as Steve mentioned, paycheck to paycheck. They're not sitting on a large savings account that they can reach into and just cut a $5,000 check for a down payment. So typically what we see down payments in this world is anywhere from $500 to $2,000, with the average being somewhere around $1,400 or $1,500 is what we typically see. And that is what it is. Probably enough to cover sales tax, but it's not going to be enough to bring down the amount financed dramatically. So the third lever that you have for the retail installment sales contract is your interest rate. And you can see here, and as we all know, interest rates have been increasing significantly and quickly. So for deep subprime tier, we're now averaging about 21.3%, and for subprime at 18.5%. And again, this particular lever is not really very flexible. And the reason for that is when you're building a risk-based interest rate, you have to take your cost of funds, you layer on your cost to originate, your cost of service, and then you have to layer on your average losses. And in the subprime and deep subprime world, average losses are typically double digits. So we're talking 10, 15, sometimes even 20% average losses. So if you don't have an interest rate commensurate with your loss rate, you will also not be in this business very long, because every loan or lease you put on the road is going to cost you money. So interest rate is fairly fixed in this scenario as well. It leaves us with one last lever on a retail installment sales contract, which you'll see on the left-hand side here is average term, loan term, right? So loan term now for deep subprime consumers is approaching 62 months. That would be just over 5 years. And for subprime tier, almost 66 months, which is 5.5 years. When I got in this business back in 2003, auto lending that is, we would not go over 36 months, maybe 42 months in those particular tiers. And the reason for that is because what typically causes a default for a consumer is going to be some kind of life event, right? It's going to be a job loss, it's going to be a divorce, an illness, or maybe the car breaking down where they need to be able to pay for the repairs as well as make their payment. And as we already talked about, this particular subset of customers aren't sitting on large savings accounts to absorb that kind of impact, right? So those life events are your primary cause for default. Obviously, the longer the term you have, the more opportunities there are for life events to take place. Makes sense, right? So the shorter the term you keep, you're actually setting your customer up for success in accomplishing a 30-month or a 36-month loan or lease. Whereas when you go 5.5 years, they're going to have to manage that large payment for a very long time. But the reality is, in today's world, you can imagine if you were to cut that term to 36 months or even 42 months, that $527 payment per month is going to go up to probably $750, maybe $800 a month. And that's simply not realistic. So you're seeing lenders and dealers turn to extending term as the solution to keep things affordable because the retail installment sales contract is just simply not that flexible.